Welcome to my video overview of how you can install Ubuntu 11.10 server x64 into or onto VMware Workstation 8. Reason why I've done this video overview is that some of you may be aware that I've been doing quite a detailed overview of how you can use Nagios monitoring or Nagios Core to monitor Exchange servers and Windows servers within your respective environments. And of course, Nagios is potentially able to run on a number of Linux platforms. I've been using Ubuntu, and I started part one with Ubuntu pre-configured. So what I thought would be useful would be to do just a very quick video overview of how you can actually install Ubuntu on VMware Workstation 8, just to kind of round off the first part of the series. So the first part naturally is to download Ubuntu to your virtualized server. As you can see, I have the ISO here. Then fire up VMware Workstation. As you can see in my environment, I already have a Nagios server here, but it won't hurt for me to just take you through how to actually do the initial install. Go to File, New Virtual Machine. I always select Custom. Select the hardware compatibility at Workstation 8. Select Next. Browse to the ISO that you've downloaded. It's already pre-configured here for me. And as you can see, Ubuntu 64-bit server 11 is detected because VMware Workstation 8 has that predefined within it. You can select I will install the operating system later, but what that will do is bypass the easy setup process, and I've found using easy setup for Ubuntu is an absolute dream. So click on Next. You'll be asked to personalize Linux, so I'm adding in my full name and what will be my administrative account with a relevant password. Remember, in Ubuntu, the root password for the user account root is disabled by default for security reasons. So this is your administrative account. Click on Next. Give the virtual machine a name and a location where it should be saved. Click on Next. Configure the number of processes that you'd like and the number of cores. I'm going to leave them at 1. Click Next. Here you configure the amount of memory that you'd like to use for the virtual machine. For the purposes of this demonstration, I'm just going to accept the defaults. Click Next. This might be different for you depending on your networking configuration in your virtualized environment, but I'm going to use bridge networking. So it'll share the IP connectivity with the local host. These I generally just leave at the defaults. Click Next. Select on here you're asked to create a new virtual disk, new system disk. So I go select create new virtual disk. Next. Accept the defaults for the disk type, which is SCSI. Click Next, and then select the size of the virtual disk that you want. I typically leave this at the defaults. For Ubuntu, depending if you're going to use it in test or production, you might want to up this a little bit, or if you're feeling or you know a little bit more about Linux or Ubuntu, you can configure it so that you have a system partition and then add in some partitions later on where you're going to install the Nagios configuration files. But for the purposes of this demonstration, I would just leave it at 20 gig and install Ubuntu all on the system disk. I typically select store as a single file. You can allocate the disk space now, but that naturally takes a little while depending on the performance of your hard drives and the size of the disk you've selected. So I just basically let the disk expand as needed. There can be a performance hit in it, but for the purposes of what we've been doing, the performance hit is negligible. When you're happy here, click Next. Be asked to name the disk file. I typically always add in something like system, so I know it's the system disk when looking at it within the Windows file system. Click Next, and you'll be presented with a summary. Here I always click on configure hardware, and I remove things like the USB controller, sound card, printer, and the floppy drive. Again, this is all down to you, what you select to do here. I remove them because I don't need them in my environment. And then I click on Finish, and then the installation from the ISO kicks off within your new virtual machine. Within the window you can see that Ubuntu is running through a number of processes to install its binaries to the system disk that we created in the configuration wizard. So when this is done, we should have a Ubuntu server ready and waiting to be used with Nagios. What I suggest is when this has completed is that you can jump straight in at part 1 of the configuring Ubuntu server with Nagios article, which will then explain to you the steps that you need to take to then finish off the configuration to prepare the machine. So this can take, the installation process here can take a little while. Usually, I find usually probably about 5 to 6 minutes, which is certainly a big difference from Windows. When the installer is finished, the virtual machine will reboot, and during the reboot process, you'll be prompted to install the VMware tools for Linux, or in this case Ubuntu. You may get this message, which basically means there's an ISO locked into the CD-ROM for this virtual machine, and basically what it wants to do is to disconnect the CD-ROM, which is the ISO, and mount the VMware tools in the CD-ROM. So click yes, and VMware tools will install, as you can see. And after a brief pause, the machine will go to your Ubuntu login prompt, and you're ready to start with part 1 of my blog series. So anyway, I hope you found that useful. As you can see, it's pretty straightforward. As I said, any comments, suggestions or feedback, please pass them on to me via the website www.telnetport25.com via the contact section. Thank you very much. Goodbye.